You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. So we're now going to be joined on the phone. Firstly, thank you very much for joining us. If you could just introduce yourself to our listeners, that would be really good.
Lovely. It's Jonathan Scott, a wildlife photographer and television presenter author who lives in Kenya, born in England, escaped in 1974 on an overland trip which took me from London all the way to Johannesburg for, 4 months, 6,000 miles, and that was the beginning of my Africa adventure, and it continues to this day. I've spent the last 40 years living in Kenya.
So I was hoping you could first tell us a little bit about how the conservancy concept works.
Okay, so when we talk about wildlife conservancies, we're talking about, in Kenya, areas which are private lands, so they're not national parks or national game reserves, which are administered by central government and which are protecting wildlife and where nobody is allowed to live. We're talking about wildlife conservancies in this instance, which surround the area we're most familiar with, the Maasai Mara National Reserve in western Kenya. And to the north are open lands which were occupied and still are occupied by the Maasai herdsmen, whose land it is, part of Maasai land, whose land has been subdivided into 50 to 100 acre plots. And that means a total change in the way the landscape is used. It's no longer available for large-scale movement of cattle in a nomadic way. And it obviously was going to pose issues for conservationists who would be concerned about the animals, that there are no fences between the conservancies and the reserve. So as the animals, the lions, the leopards, the cheetahs, the wildebeest, the zebra, the buffalo, the elephants, as they move out onto those private lands, if that land was to be cut up into those 100-acre plots and fenced or used for agriculture, it would be the end of the game. And so the tourism industry saw the potential to work with the Maasai community and to make a deal with them whereby the tour operators would build a limited number of camps or lodges in, say, a 60,000-acre wildlife conservancy, and they would then pay an annual lease fee, a fee per acre, to the landowners. So the landowners basically got money for the offset of their land. They de-stocked or reduced the number of cattle on the land, and the tour operators built lodges in that area on the basis of one bed per 700 acres. So a sustainable model where you would have less tourists, still having the same wildlife experience, and the local community would benefit directly from revenue generated by tourism. So it's a win-win situation.
Now, you're saying that you live in Kenya. How have things kind of changed, and what are your favourite areas of the country?
So I first saw Kenya on that overland trip in 1974. I first saw the Maasai Mara, where we filmed Big Cat Diaries, where we're based still to this day. We have a second home in the Maasai Mara. It's a 5-hour drive from where our primary residence is in Nairobi, which is the capital city of Kenya, which of course also has its own national park, which is a wonder in today's day and age, with lions and leopards there, which people can visit right on the doorstep on their arrival to Kenya. The biggest change, I think, is in terms of the growth in the human population, as in most places in the world. I mean, 1977, probably about 15, 17 million Kenyans living in the country, and now perhaps 40 to 50 million, 45 million people. So a huge increase in the human population, a lot of pressure on the last wildlands. I mean, I would think about 6 to 8% of Kenya is protected as wilderness area, either as forests or national parks, national game reserves. So there's a big chunk of the land that is protected, but there's a lot of pressure, more people wanting more land, and so it's a race between people and wildlife as to who gains, priority, and we all know it's going to be people. So something like the conservancy model, which is a non-governmental initiative between private enterprise and local people, which benefits them, helps protect the land, helps protect the wildlife. I see that the right direction in which to be going. But by 2050, I think there will be another billion people living in Africa. And of course, one of our big problems is the impact of climate change. So areas are getting drier, food insecurity is getting greater, but tourism is a vital part of Kenya's economy, and we need people to come and visit places like the Maasai Mara, because every person who does visit it pays an annual fee, maybe $80 a day to be in the reserve, and they will also pay a fee to be in the conservancy, and that money is helping to actually protect the wildlife. So tourism is very important.
And living there, that length of time, you must certainly enjoy living there, and also feel you're playing a big part in that conservancy story, as it were.
I think so, because in the 40 years that I've lived in Kenya, I mean, I've never tired of the wildlife experience. The people in Kenya are so warm and friendly. I think we're wonderful at the service industry. There is such a sense of giving from people to visitors. Visitors always come back. They start off raving about the big cats, and they end up going away talking about how wonderful the people were, and invariably they want to come back. So I think, our role in terms of promoting Kenya and doing what I'm doing today, spreading the word, it's vitally important. And of course, television and the impact of our television programs and of our books, it's always incredibly reaffirming to have people say to us, we're here because we saw your television program, or we watched Big Cat, or we bought The Big Cat Man, your autobiography. We were inspired to go and see it for ourselves. We always want people to get off their backside and not just see it as something on television, as I did when I was a little kid, but get up, pack your bag, take a safari. It's affordable. That's the first thing I think to underline for people. Is a lot of people think, that's just for rich people. No, it isn't. You can go on safari as a backpacker. You can hire a car in Nairobi and drive yourself. There's plenty of choices, and if you want to actually access those choices, then the easiest way I would suggest doing that is Googling magicalkenya.com and have a look at what's on offer. I mean, it's a feast. And if you want to Google us, Jonathan Angela Scott, and contact us, we'll be only too happy also to point you in the right direction. So there's absolutely no excuse not to take your next big adventure and make it Kenya.
Well, I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about the Tales by Light series and the new TV series you're currently filming.
Okay, so Netflix, which is one of the great sort of bastions now of content in terms of, for people like us creating wildlife movies, Netflix at the moment is showing Tales by Light 2, which is a 3-part series on wildlife photographers, or photographers in general, and conservationists. And the first of those, based on our book Sacred Nature, featuring myself and my wife Angie, charts our journey in the Maasai Mara, our sort of, desire to try and do whatever we can to help protect that area through our work and working with local communities. But then also, we're filming this year a new series in the Maasai Mara for 1 hour, which will be going out probably February, March next year. Can't tell you yet who it's going out with. That's still wrapped under covers. But it's going to be an incredible series. We filmed the first 5-6 week segment in February, March. We'll be filming the second one in August, September, the height of our tourist season. So I'm hoping to see lots of your viewers or your listeners out on safari at the same time and come up and say hi to us while we're filming. And, we're hoping to bring the big cats back into your bedroom. No, back into your living room.
And I assume that, you hope that all this sort of work you do with television, letting people know, does play a big part in, conservancy. I
think, the conservancy model is the way forward, really, and it's sort of spread right across Kenya. So we have the Northern Conservancy Alliance, we have the Kenya Association of Wildlife Conservancies. I think conservationists will tell you it's probably one of the biggest and most powerful and successful initiatives in the history of conservation in Kenya, because we started off in the early days, when Kenya was a colony with the colonial government creating parks and reserves, often to protect the wildlife, it was said, but normally because the land was perceived as not being good to be plowed up, for agriculture. So land was set aside. But this conservancy model today is driven by local communities wanting to secure a future for themselves and for wildlife. And we all know that if you want to protect wildlife, you have to look to the interests of the local communities and make sure that they are benefiting directly. Now, when governments are in charge of the revenue stream, it's much harder for transparency, to be seen to be working. Whereas if it's the local community directly working with tour operators to create a model whereby they get paid, it's a straightforward transaction. The tour operators pay the landowner for a lease per year, a fixed fee per acre per year. It's a direct deal between the two parties. They can see what's going on. They see where the money goes, direct transaction. That is much more satisfying and likely to, make the local people feel that they really are benefiting financially from us, Westerners, people from overseas, visitors coming to want to come and look at Africa's last remaining wildlife. But let's face it, we've chopped down our own trees. We've destroyed a lot of our own wildlife. We're now relying on Africa, to play host to us on safari. Well, we have to actually help support that. And this is one way we can do it.
Was there anything else you'd like to cover or get over to our listeners, or any sort of useful contact details where they can find out more?
Well, as I say, magicalkenya.com is a great site for people to look up, what they can do in Kenya. I think, say to people that, don't try and do too much on your first trip, because if you go to Kenya, you're going to want to come back. So if you're going to do a safari, and I hope you will, make sure the Mara is top of your list. So the Maasai Mara, where we're based, is top of your list. Make sure you have 3 days minimum there. If you get a chance to visit the coast as well, the Kenya coast is a wonderful place to stay. But the internet is such a rich source of information for people nowadays. There's no reason why people can't, say, oh, well, I can't find out how to go, where to go, when to go. You can find out what's the best season. And obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but just to give you a heads up, we're about to go into the peak season for animal watching and great times to visit Kenya from the sort of end of June onwards. But of course, out of season is great too, because you get a better deal and less people. I often go to places when it's low season because simply it's the same product, but in a much less tranquil setting.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us here at BRFM Bridge Radio on the Daniel Monday Night Community Show.
Lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me along, and welcome to Kenya, as we say in Swahili, Karibuni, Kenya.